Chapter 3 Mr. Martin's Garden. Because they had the marvelous elevator, they didn't need to use the stairs. For a long time they were just there, without being used at all. Then, one day, they found a new use. Mr. Martin was working in his garden, and Matthew Maria was helping. It was a very hot, sunny day. "I love gardens," said Mr. Martin, "but I do wish they could be inside. If my garden were inside, it would not be so hot." "Why can't they be inside?" asked Matthew Maria. "There isn't any soil inside," answered Mr. Martin, "and without soil you can't plant seeds. And without seeds you can't grow plants. And without plants you can't have a garden." "What if we brought some soil inside?" asked Matthew Maria. "Then we could plant seeds, and they would grow, and it would be a garden." Mr. Martin thought about this. "But where could we put a garden inside the house?" he asked. "There isn't any room." Then Matthew Maria closed her eyes and thought hard, and finally she had an idea. "What about the staircase?" she asked. "No one uses the staircase." Then Mr. Martin realized this was true, and all at once he decided that he should build a garden right there inside the house. "After all," he said, "everybody likes plants. And there are a lot of plants outside, but there are no plants inside, so I will bring some in." Then Matthew Maria and Mr. Martin carried soil from the garden outside and dumped it on the stairs. Mr. Martin planted tomato plants, and Matthew Maria planted strawberries. But it still wasn't perfect. Mr. Martin was wondering what his new garden needed when Mrs. Martin came home. She had been shopping with Melanie, Maura, Mia, and Mary. They were all very surprised to find a garden started on the staircase, but they agreed to help. "Perhaps it needs flowers," Mrs. Martin suggested. So Melanie planted tulips, Maura and Mia planted daffodils, and Mary planted bluebells. Finally, Mrs. Martin planted roses. "Now there is no more room to plant anything," said Mr. Martin, "but I still feel like something is missing." Then Matthew Maria came up with another idea. "Perhaps the plants will need sunlight," she said. There was a window that looked over the stairs, but it was a very small window. "I know," said Mr. Martin. "We can make a skylight, a window on the ceiling that will let in lots of light." "I am not sure that is a good idea," said Mrs. Martin. But Mr. Martin wasn't listening. He ran to find a saw. "Oh dear," said Mrs. Martin, and she went to find some rope so that Mr. Martin could be safely tied to the roof while he worked. She also looked at a plan of the house. The plan showed that there were no electric wires in the ceiling over the staircase. She didn't want Mr. Martin to electrocute himself. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" she asked him, after she had checked everything. "Of course it's a good idea," he said, "and soon there will be plenty of sunlight for my garden." Then he climbed onto the roof and began to cut a hole. It was a very large hole. It took a long time to cut. Mrs. Martin, Melanie, Maura, Mia, Mary, and Matthew Maria all watched him work. At last the hole was finished. A large piece of the ceiling fell crashing down. "Oops," said Mr. Martin from on top of the roof. "I hope that didn't harm the garden." But when they dragged away the piece of the roof, everything was fine. "Now I have my garden and my skylight," said Mr. Martin, "but I still feel like something is missing." He scratched his head and thought hard, but he never could come up with an answer.